Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Connect2Car Roundtable discussion entitled CyberSecurity. Do we feel good enough to be just a little paranoid? Your moderator is Gloria Diana from General Telecom Systems Incorporated. You are invited to submit questions for today's roundtable through the SAE International's WCX app. Ladies and gentlemen, Gloria Diana.
No, there we go.
Laura, you can begin whenever you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Diana. We're here to talk about whether we should still be a little bit paranoid. I'm going to do a little PR for a book here. I just wrote this book for SAE on cybersecurity for commercial vehicles, which is focusing on class 7 and 8. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves and then do a little bit about what keeps them up at night. So Andre, go ahead.
Yes, hello. I'm Andre Weimerskirch. I'm the Vice President for Cybersecurity and Functional Safety at Lear Corporation. Lear Corporation is America's largest automotive supplier, and I deal with cybersecurity every day, and hopefully I can sleep during the nights.
Hi, I'm Larry Hilkeny. I lead product cybersecurity at Cummins. We are the world's largest engine manufacturer, and I actually do manage to sleep at night, although my wife will tell you it's not necessarily seamlessly.
I'm Kevin Walker. I'm the Chief Product and Information Security Officer for Aptiv. I actually sleep well as well, although it does remind me of a story about George Washington during the American Revolutionary War, when a reporter came to him and said, "What keeps you awake at night?" And the general of an emerging army and new country, and he was thinking, well, the new Congress isn't really working the way I want. My troops are starving and freezing. But what keeps me awake is the spies. And so what keeps me concerned are the digital spies, not the human factors. So we have a lot of work as a industry. We have a lot of work to do across all of cybersecurity, across the industries, to make sure we keep the bad guys out.
Hi, my name is Kevin Gay. I'm Senior Advisor for Technology Policy at NHTSA. And so my portfolio includes not just cybersecurity, but also spectrum and radio frequency communications. I've been working on the infrastructure side quite a bit, so coming at it from a slightly different angle. But I will say, sort of one of the things I do think about, what really keeps me up at night is my 3-month-old. And so I'm up every couple of hours, and then in those times when I'm awake and feeding my daughter, I'm thinking, okay, I need to do this and this. And one of the things I think a lot about is the intersection between the vehicle and the infrastructure. We've got a lot more connectivity coming into the infrastructure. We've got a lot more connectivity in newer model vehicles and next generation communications with 5G and IoT and other things. And so I think a lot about, all right, well, what are we going to do to get ahead of the curve on some of those emerging technologies, especially on the infrastructure side, which I've got a bit more experience with.
Excellent. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Macedo. I'm the Vice President of Global Cybersecurity for General Motors. I'm responsible for all aspects of cybersecurity at General Motors, including product, information, manufacturing, security of our financial operations, security of our autonomous vehicle operations out at Cruise in Southern California, as well as the security operations of GM Defense. So what keeps me up at night? Quite honestly, what keeps me up at night is whether or not we actually all are doing what we say we are doing relative to taking cybersecurity seriously. And I don't mean in this room, but I mean in industry in general. So I know the automotive industry is doing a lot. I know everybody in this room is taking this very seriously. But our worlds are so connected, and all parts of our lives are so connected that if anybody's saying they're doing a lot and they aren't, it puts all of us at risk as individuals, and that absolutely keeps me up at night.
So we have an interesting panel that we can talk about cars as well as commercial vehicles. And so as we talk about things, especially Larry doing cars and trucks, Andre started out with commercial vehicles as well as doing cars, Apted with cars and trucks. You as you're getting into the defense side as well. So we're going to do two different aspects. And so one of the questions is, how are we doing today? And what have we done well in the last couple of years? So I'm going to start with you, Jeff.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the how are we what?
How are we doing?
Excellent, how are we doing? So I think as an industry we're doing really well. So I have the opportunity to chair the automotive ISAC. I've been chair for 2 years, vice chair for 2 years prior to that. So I've really seen, and that was a lot of work with NHTSA that started that, and even our alliances that helped us start up that, and a lot of people sitting on this panel were a start of that as well. But I've had the great opportunity to see the maturity of how we've started to address this as an industry, and I think some of us were doing a lot beforehand, and I'll put a plug in for General Motors. We've been a leader in connected cars since 1996. We have over 10 million connected cars on the road today just in the United States alone, so with OnStar. So there's been a lot going on, but the industry really came together about 4 years ago. And when we came together, we really came together not just as an OEM group, but as an OEM group, a supplier group, a strategic partner group, a key technology group, and we haven't just matured our ability to talk to each other and interact, kind of getting ahead of sharing vulnerability and threat information, but we've also developed a series of best practices, and I know we've talked about this, and you've probably heard about it, so I won't stand on it too much, but it's been really good to talk about how we brought the entire industry up from a maturity perspective by building off of what each other have done individually in our companies. And really, in a highly competitive industry, you wouldn't have the chance to do that if you didn't have a forum like that out there. So that's just one example of I think we're doing really well at this.
Kevin Walker, what are your thoughts?
I think I agree with Jeff. In fact, Jeff mentioned something earlier in your opening comments about those outside of this room, and that's an important piece for us to be collectively in support of making sure that our cybersecurity programs are consistent throughout our entire portfolio. So one of the things that I think we as an industry, and I'm only a year and a few months into this industry, but multiple decades in cybersecurity, and I'll tell you that I thought we were in a different position than what I really see we are. We're in a much better position vis-a-vis what most other industries are, the collaboration, the sharing of not just vulnerabilities and best practices, but thoughts and ideas is really vibrant. I think this is something that we have to continue to enforce and to instill, again, outside of this room as well, to make sure that it's not a competitive advantage, right, to make sure that any of our vehicles or any of our products are safe. It's something that we all take serious and we all take professional pride in. But I think one of the things we need to do now is to take the work that has been done with Auto ISAC and other organizations and go that next level. And that is, really, let's get to the point where we can be ahead of attacks instead of being reactive to attacks. This is something that most practitioners want anyway, and I think we have a unique opportunity to do it in automotive.
So I'm going to jump over to Andre. Andre, you sort of were at the beginning of all of this, especially having founded eScript. Can you talk about where you see cars, what you've seen in the past decade, as well as what you're seeing as you're looking at SCARs as papers are coming in?
Yes, so I'm doing this automotive cybersecurity for close to 20 years now, and I think especially in the last 5 years there's a huge improvement, to support these opinions, where I see far more tangible technological solutions in cars coming. I would be, those of you who are familiar with some of the recent hacks, like recent in the sense of the last 5 years hacks to cars, if we see in the next generation of vehicles, if we see similar hacks, I would be fairly surprised. I think all the sort of the low-hanging fruits, the easy, and even easy in exclamation marks, because it's still, I think for the Jeep Cherokee hack, it was like a 2-year effort to do it. I think all of these entrance paths are really closed. And I think where it goes is, what Jeff in the beginning mentioned, that we need to start looking at the the broader environment around cars. We are doing fairly well at protecting the car as such, but the car can be, it becomes part of the Internet of Things. So someone might try to, having electric vehicles, someone might try to hack into the charger system for the vehicle, not even to have an impact to the vehicle, but to have an impact to the power grid. And I think, we need to sort of raise the level of discussion to the next level to really cover this full environment.
So Larry, I'm going to have you sort of compare and contrast cars versus commercial vehicles. And so a little bit about the ISAC and how you see the commercial vehicle, coming up this steep path that automotive has been climbing.
Sure. So I happen to be the chair of the commercial vehicle affinity group within the ISAC. We added the ISAC, so we joined actually initially as a supplier because we do cover the spectrum of everything from pickup trucks to, heavy duty on highway vehicles. And I've seen a similar kind of progress in the commercial vehicle space. We recognize that there are improvements we have to make. The other thing is, as we think about that spectrum of cars, one of the things that I always ask is, don't forget about the truck sitting next to the car, because we've tended to, particularly in some of the not necessarily regulatory, but more in the legislative areas, have tended to break that line for different reasons, and it's one of the things that actually does cause me concern as a supplier to both, and also just thinking about that entire structure. It'd be really awful for the signal on that car to not be read by the heavy truck next to it, both doing 70 miles an hour down an interstate highway. So I think the other thing is, to Jeff's point about thinking about people outside the room, I do not have responsibility for my IT information systems. I'm a trusted customer. So I need to make sure that all those systems are safe and secure, and so that the code that I'm putting into those products is what I think it is. I need that up and down my supply chain. And so if I think about in the commercial vehicle space, where we don't necessarily have a unified thing like an OnStar, but we have distributed telematics providers, I need all those telematics providers to also have that same level of security. Same thing with electronic driver logs. So there's an entire ecosystem that I think we need to make sure we're paying attention to all of that, because as anybody who's a cybersecurity practitioner knows, it's the weakest link in the chain that's going to get exploited.
So Kevin, I'm going to pick on you, and that is react to what this group has just sort of talked about.
Well, that's good. Listening to all of this, I completely agree. NHTSA's position is we think there's great work going on in the auto ISAC. We think the best practices that are coming out are very positive. We really do think that seeing the industry consensus standards work that is going on between SAE and ISO, activities like that really give us a good feel for where the cybersecurity hygiene is in the industry and the posture, and we think that's all headed in a very positive direction. We do think it's important to continue to be vigilant, to continue to do risk management, looking at where emerging threats are coming from, staying on top of new technologies, and continuing to do research around that. So I guess it's a message of, I think we've done a great job, but I also think we don't want to sort of rest on our laurels, I suppose, and that there's a lot of new things coming at us that we're going to have to pay attention to in the next couple of years is what I think.
So I'm going to change this up a little bit. Let's get a little controversial here. So Jeff, I'll start with you. Do you think that vehicles could be weaponized?
Vehicles could be weaponized. It's a really interesting question. Vehicles could be weaponized, but would it be reasonable for vehicles to be weaponized? And that's, we talk about, what's the risk and what risk are we trying to mitigate? So I believe a more plausible attack on a connected ecosystem in a vehicle would be something along the lines of ransomware. So it's not weaponized, but it's motivated by a bad actor who's motivated by financial gain, who wants to make all of us have a really hard time getting to work in the morning. We get in our car and you want to start your car, call a number, pay 1/10 of a Bitcoin, and you're in. That to me is more plausible than weaponized, because when I think about, and we work a lot with Homeland Security and all the agencies to talk about these sorts of things, there's a lot of other different targets that would be more reasonable to try to weaponize than a vehicle itself. That being said, when we talk about the risk and the mitigation strategies that we put in place, we look at the gamut of what might be able to happen and ensure that we have controls and capabilities throughout our ecosystem to manage whether it's a typical, just a virus on the vehicle versus a ransomware attack versus we have someone actually trying to attack our ecosystem to gain remote control of vehicles.
Does anybody else want to stab at that? Take a stab?
I tend to agree with Jeff, which is painful to say, but it's true in this case.
Thank you, Larry.
So I'm going to ask a question to you, Kevin, from an ecosystem standpoint. So as you're starting to look at the vehicles, talking to RF systems, talking up to telematics, telecommunications, can you talk a little bit as to what NHTSA's been doing, say, in the V2X space for understanding how all this stuff communicates?
Sure. I guess I shouldn't have sat beside Kevin here because now I'm...
That's okay.
No, it's quite okay. So on the V2X side, NHTSA has done quite a bit of work in developing a trust management system for V2X communications, right? So the idea behind V2X communications is you have two vehicles that can share information, but they might not know each other before they share that information. It's really important to be able to trust that information. And so we worked very closely with Andre and our partners at CAMP, which is a consortium of OEMs, to prototype what a trust management system would look like. We called it the Security Credential Management System. But what we ended up doing were basically attaching digital signatures to each of the messages that are sent over the air, so that way when you receive a message, you're able to ensure that you can trust it. And that's a very specific sort of sliver of communications and what could be coming further on down the road. We do think there is a lot of value in being able to share information between vehicles, especially where traditional sensors can't see, like around blind corners and intersection movement assist looks at that use case where you've got two vehicles coming in an intersection, which are unfortunately a cause of fatal crashes, a severe number. And one of the only ways right now to address it is really with that V2X communications, because it's able to go around those obstructions that hinder traditional sensors. And so ensuring trust in those types of communications is absolutely vital, because if the vehicle doesn't trust it, they're never going to use any of that information. They're just going to look at it and assign a confidence and throw it away or whatever. And so we've been doing a lot of work to help mature that ecosystem so that it's ready, and that right now there are folks deploying that on the infrastructure side. We've seen quite a few announcements from OEMs. We've also seen locations like Colorado and Atlanta who are deploying this connected infrastructure so to be ready for this type of communications when it is available on vehicles. And so we're seeing very positive movement in that area, and we've done a lot of groundwork to help support the ecosystem there.
And so Larry, we've had these conversations. What about cars talking big trucks?
I think it's critical. I think it's absolutely critical, and I agree that the trust model has to be there. One of my things that actually theoretically could keep me up at night is a big truck hitting a car and maybe not even knowing it hit it. 80,000 rolling pounds, that's a lot of kinetic energy. And whether it's changing lanes or coming to a stop or slowing down, I think having that interconnectivity is just vital to this kind of V2X system.
Okay, we're going to change it up, but this time, Kevin Walker. Since you guys are both big suppliers, well, actually three of them here are big suppliers, can we talk a little bit about...
The size jokes again. Says
what?
Big and says my name.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But the question is, what about supply chain risks? So you're... the tier ones basically start to look at the tier twos and the tier threes. Do you have concerns as you start looking at your suppliers and ECUs and maybe malicious software and embedded hardware and firmware? Go ahead, expound. What are your concerns?
So this is a concern I think that obviously the entire industry has. It's not new by any stretch of the imagination. We've been having supply chain vetting for many, many years. But frankly, as a practitioner, my concern are more of common off-the-shelf technologies, is where I would have the most concern. Software is relatively speaking easy because we can actually, on our purchase and license agreement, we can inspect code, right? So we can even spin it ourselves if we want to. Hardware is a little bit different. But I think it goes back to the risk model that Jeff alluded to, is there some things we can have a level of confidence in using that won't impact other parts of the ecosystem, right? So that level of vetting may be less. The parts that are life safety related, that's going to be continue to be an extremely impactful vetting process. I think that over the past several years, there have been some really good technologies that help us look at hardware impact. In my previous role as a CTO of a networking company, I had the same problem, exactly the same concerns, right? And so what we did is we found some technology that really help us to do up to including RF scans, right? For example, what is this device actually radiating, and then is it consistent? To do X-rays, right? We do all kind of methods to see, here's the baseline, is there a variation? So yes, the supply chain all the way down to chips or what have you that aren't produced by tier 1, tier 2, or even tier 3, making sure that that's vetted, that they're vetted. Now having said that, this is an opportunity for us also to share notes. Why should Andre have to go through the same thing that Larry goes through and I'm doing it, right? Why can't we come up with a mechanism by which we can share, if we'll share notes there and do it once? So I think this is something, again, it's not new, it's something that is a concern, but it doesn't keep me up at night.
Andre.
Yes, so I think handling supply chain is one of the most challenging items on my daily to-do list. We spend a lot of time and effort and money to get our security in order, but we have a well-sized, dedicated cybersecurity team, and then we have many tier 2 suppliers, and those tier 2 suppliers are often far smaller than we are. And so now we have the challenge to understand, is the product that they gave to me, whether it's hardware, software, whatever, is that secure? Because they do not have the dedicated resources. Additionally, no one so far figured out how do we actually measure security. If I would give you a car, a component, a smartphone, a whatever electronic device, we do not know how to measure security easily. So what we actually do is we do audits. We check their process because we believe that a company that follows a clean, rigid process around cybersecurity will deliver a secure product. There's a mapping, obviously, but we try to do no more. We try to test the result and then do these things. And that's just software. And then around hardware, so we receive, from our supplier entire boards, and they are somewhere produced in countries that some people say might not be trustworthy always. So who knows if hardware is manipulated somewhere between our supplier and us. Who knows if someone hacked into our supplier's systems to introduce malware into their source code bases. It's a really challenging issue, and I think there are lots and lots of opportunities to do better.
But Jeff?
Gloria, do you mind if I add in? Yeah, I
if you
agree.
could add
So
on.
Andre, I think this is, and Kevin both, this is a huge challenge. This is a huge challenge. As an OEM, it's one of our biggest challenges. We have tens of thousands of suppliers, and Andre nailed it. I mean, Kevin, a critical partner of ours as a corporation, he has the ability to attract talent. He can, create great security posture solutions that can be put in, but at the same time, these small suppliers, and I would say, a lot of people talk about small and medium businesses. I call it like small and small businesses, because medium, I think, can actually get some talent as well. But these small and small businesses, which, oh, by the way, I mean, you talk about like the defense, I'll bring the defense department into this as well. They're trying to commercialize and get new technology into their ecosystem. It's a lot of small and small businesses that have that, and we need that as well. That's our disruptive technology to make our cars better and more attractive. And so the problem is that you can't get that talent when you're a small business. And so we've recently, and I wanted to share this because I think it's important, we joined an organization called Cyber Readiness Institute. And Cyber Readiness Institute is an organization that's going after trying to help small and small businesses, because as Andre said, you can put requirements out there. I mean, we have security controls in our ecosystem that are independent of our partners. We have some that are very dependent on our partners, and you can audit the heck out of people. I can't audit tens of thousands of suppliers. It just isn't physically possible. But at the same time, just the basic cyber hygiene. Use strong passwords. Don't use USB sticks. I mean, there's some small companies out there that their cyber guy and their IT guy or gal is the local high school student in the town that happens to know a little bit about computers. So, something like Cyber Readiness Institute can help those people and those companies get a basic cyber hygiene that'll take away 85-90% of my concerns of them protecting my IP or helping to provide secure solutions to me. Not that that's a silver bullet, but I think it's a really important thing and something that we're vested in as a company financially and to bring capability to those small and medium businesses or small businesses to help them.
Yeah, I think, Andre, you mentioned something that I think I may challenge you a little bit. There are good metrics, but not necessarily in our industry. So we need to look across to fintech to look at some of the work that's done in the broader, if you will, technology communities that they really have come up with some fairly reasonable and useful measurements for security. Part of it is, as you said, as an example, do these companies from an audit perspective have repeatable processes? That's table stakes, right? But the question is, what are the artifacts that they actually build? And are they consistent with that, right? And can you measure that with technology, not necessarily by having a human to go out and do an audit? And I think, again, we should collectively consider bringing in some of those other experiences because they do exist.
Larry, do you want to talk, well, we've talked about this, about sort of the advantages in a way between commercial vehicles versus automotive, just because of volumes?
Well, so one of the things that we've been able to do is because we produce engines across markets, that does give me a certain volume advantage on those specialized products. The other thing that it does, quite frankly, is it lets me take some of the security advantages that are driven by automotive and move them up market. We try to leverage that position as much as we can because, interestingly enough, yes, my OEM customers want the secure product. They really don't want me to increase the price in doing so. Right? They want me to hold that down, and I totally get that because I'm in the same position with my suppliers. Right? I want that to be a secure product, but I really don't want to pay any more for it than I have to. So, but yeah, there is we sit in an interesting intersection as a company between supplying automotive, not just in the US, but across the world, and supplying commercial vehicles. There are certain economies of scale that we get by serving various markets, and that does translate to better security and actually portability of those processes across those products.
So I'm going to ask the audience, just out of a show of hands, and also see who's listening. Has anybody heard of a new SAE initiative called G32, which is Cyber Physical Systems? None.
I saw one.
I saw one.
So SAE is working on launching a cyber physical systems standard that is sort of above and beyond what automotive has done from a cyber standpoint. And really trying to go across aerospace, DoD, cars, trucks, if FinTech's interested. FinTech doesn't always show up to these sort of sessions. And ideally anchored by the DoD. So to get at how do I deal with those very small companies, how do I deal with the technology? I was just down at Cape Canaveral about a month ago talking about this, and when you're looking in the defense industry or the space industry, they basically are talking about 100 components. And I'm like, that's prototype to us, so that's pretty easy. Jeff, I'm going to let you chat about this, and then I'm going to go to Andre. So can you talk a little bit about over-the-air updates?
Sure.
And what's going on, and General Motors' view of that. Yeah. Then Andre, I'm going to go to you on OTA and talk a little bit about Optane. And then I'm going to bounce down as to how you guys see that and how it's affecting your ECUs as well, from an Aptiv standpoint, from a Cummins standpoint. And then you're going to finish up to see how the government's looking at this as well. So Jeff, can you talk a little bit about over-there updates and sort of General Motors' vision on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we as a company, we view over-the-air updates as critical. We've actually been doing over-the-air updates on our connected ecosystem on OnStar and some of our infotainment platforms for many, many years. I want to be very clear, especially with my my NHTSA member here next to me. We don't view over-the-air updates as a way to beta test new functionality in our vehicles, so I want to be very clear about that. We view over-the-air updates as a critical part of two things. One, it's our cyber response mechanism. So, we have a three-pillared approach. I'm not going to go into the depth of it because it's like the tagline of every cyber thing that happens, right? Defense in depth, monitoring, detection, and response. It's a critical part of our response capability. If we identify, cyber vulnerabilities, we view that the safety of the customer is the highest priority. When we put technology in the customer's hands, it's on us to keep it safe and secure for the life of the vehicle. And we could probably go into what that means for a 15-minute conversation, but we truly believe that, and therefore our ability to either update that system from a cyber standpoint, or if we identify a potential quality or safety defect, the other reason why over-the-air updates are very important, to be able to do that quickly for the customer and safely and securely is very important. But the second part of the cyber side of that is, if we can't keep the system secure, because the technology becomes deprecated, our ability to securely turn off that feature or technology to ensure that our customers are not at risk is the other side of that. So over-the-air updates are critical. We're actually launching an electrical architecture this year where we're going to have over-the-air updates prolific throughout the vehicle, even more than we do today. Again, not to beta test new features or functions, but rather to be able to use it for the right mechanisms or provide new, maybe infotainment features to the customer and keep the car relevant as well.
Andre.
Yeah, so as Jeff just explained, over-the-air updates are really an essential items for future vehicles. And so I think it's almost 4 years ago, when I was still with the University of Michigan, I and a professor from NYU suggested to DHS to work on over-the-air, the security of over-the-air updates. Our observation was that many systems, even today, have security flaws in the over-the-air update mechanism. And to make it very clear, I do not say that anyone here has any issues with security. But if you look at other domains, other industries, there are dozens of examples where even the big names didn't get it right, and where a flaw in the over-the-air update security mechanism has been used by hackers to get into the system. If you Google it, about 2 weeks ago is the last example. PC domain, large company had a flaw, and hundreds of thousands of computers were affected. So what we did is we established this Optane standard specification. It's all open source. If you Google Optane, you can find all the results. It provides basically guidance. How do you need to design and then implement over-the-air updates to make it secure? And again, I don't say there's no other way of doing it, but if you follow our guidance, you will have a secure system. It has been peer-reviewed by many famous security experts. Several flaws have been fixed, and as I said, it's all open, available, and it will be very soon standardized, I think in the next month or so.
Next month. So it's UPTANE, and it's up on GitHub. And go in and let them know what you think about what you see out there as well.
And maybe, so if I can do one example, I'm really involved in this topic, but like a typical thing is that people believe, there's a server in the back end and you need to hack into it to somewhat, forge the firmware update. Well, people figure out how to hack into a server, right? That is not a sufficient hurdle these days anymore. So what we do in Optane is we basically require that an attacker has to compromise an offline server to compromise the entire system. But as the name already says, it is offline, so that requires an attack in the physical world. So it's a huge threshold if you follow the Optane guidance.
So Larry, you want to talk about like how that affects you from an ECU standpoint? You've probably seen that already for OTAs coming in.
So at Cummins, we've been providing secure over-the-air updates for our 15-liter engine for the last just about 2 years now, and actually predated the publishing of the Optane model a little bit. And we have very, very intentionally thought about security, not just of the server side, the cloud side that delivers the package, but also then within the ECU itself. We've done a lot of work there to ensure that those things are secure. But kind of as Jeff said, I mean, it's also, for us, it's just another method to deliver that update to the engine outside of our normal service channel. It's nothing where we're doing any kind of beta testing or anything like that. And at the moment, it is also customer specified and customer driven. So a customer, for example, may run a mixed fleet where they have some of their machines where they want to have a different version of the software in the ECU than they do in the other half of the fleet. It's another differentiation between us and the automotive sector. But yeah, so we also though consider this is another potential way that we can deliver if we do have to provide safety or security updates. It's another way we can drive those and drive them a much faster adoption as well.
Not much really to add, I think, in reality.
Oh, okay, that's good.
But I will say one thing.
So can the OEMs afford it?
Well, they cannot afford not to, right?
Okay.
But I will say that Optane is absolutely the right direction, right, and the right approach. But I think one of the things we can do is actually fine-tune Optane to say what level. All updates are not equal. Update to my infotainment system, as you mentioned earlier, is completely different than update to an ECU. And so I think what happens is that as we iterate through this, we have even stronger controls and strong trust model, even more so for the more, again, safety critical components. But I think, not much else to add.
And Optane actually does that. So we have different categories based on what the components' performance is. So if you have an infotainment system, you have other possibilities than a very constrained device. And it's part of the security model of Optane.
So, the other Kevin, this is your question. It's a little different.
Okay.
Okay, so basically, once we do all this cool security stuff, we get new architectures on our vehicles. We've got Optane, whether it's Optane or other OTA that the OEMs design. What happens then as we put all this IoT devices on the cars? What do you think will happen?
Well, so I'm very encouraged to hear what's about the over-the-air updates. I think that very much agree with what we've heard here in the panel. It's an important tool. At the same time, we want to make sure it doesn't introduce new vulnerabilities into the vehicle, is basically what I had heard. And we're completely in agreement with that at NHTSA. And so more directly to your question, what happens as we incorporate more communications and more IoT devices into the vehicle is sort of the same response, right? As we're adding in all this new technology, as we're potentially redesigning the architecture or connecting the vehicle to infrastructure and back office systems, we want to make sure we don't add in new risks and new vulnerabilities to the system. So I think we have to do it in a very risk management sort of method where we're really looking at what we're adding in, and we're also following best practices and guidance. I know NIST is putting out guidance on IoT cybersecurity. We've been looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework on the infrastructure side, learning from that as well. And so I think that's really the direction we would be going as we start adding in new capabilities into the vehicles, making sure we're learning from other industries that may have had to tackle this already, and also looking at some of the best practices from my colleagues in the federal government at NIST and otherwise.
So we're going to move to something a little bit more touchy-feely. I'm going to go across, I'm assuming everybody's cybersecurity workforces are growing, and that is, where are you finding your new cybersecurity analyst, upper management? Larry, start.
So we're actually finding, so we participate and help sponsor an initiative every summer called the Cybertruck Challenge. And we bring about 50, and it's actually people on this panel have actually been involved in that as well. but about 50 students come every year to Detroit, and first couple days are they're learning to hack if they don't know how to hack. The next couple days they're hacking, and on Friday morning they're showing what they've done. And we've actually found that to be a very nice talent pool. The other thing from an internal perspective, quite frankly, I face a challenge. And the challenge is I either find people who know vehicle infrastructure, vehicle networking, and embedded systems, and not really know kind of the IT cyber principles, or I find people who know the IT cyber principles but don't understand embedded systems in a vehicle network. And so what I've actually done is I've comprised my internal team, is I've actually tapped both pools, then put them together so that they can rely on each other, they train each other, and I get a bigger talent pool that already knows Cummins. So the other part of the challenge of bringing in any engineer into a system like this is, we're a 100-year-old company, which means I've got 100 years of traditions. Some are better than others, but you need to know how to work within that internal ecosystem of Cummins. And so finding that talent, developing that talent is really critical. We've also been working with the Auto ISAC to develop a training scheme to help us, and so a number of us, I think, face a similar kind of challenge. And so finding those students is really tough. We're also noticing now, though, universities are starting to add either a cyber certificate or a cyber minor onto any major. I was actually just at a university last Friday where they are combining cyber defense and cyber physical systems. So they're putting the College of IT and the College of Engineering together to develop new talent. It's a growing problem. A, we're competing with people on the coast, and then B, we're trying to convince them that big trucks are cool, and they, when they realize that A, we're making them autonomous, and B, we're electrifying them, and then hooking them up to power grids. That's a lot of fun stuff, but it's how do we build that? How do we build that excitement? And how do we get that tech? How do we get that tech talent to the Midwest?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Larry. I think the reality is, for 3 decades now, I've been building cyber teams, right? And about 12 years ago, I realized I was doing it wrong because I was building cyber teams. The reality is I need to actually educate the engineers who are already there. And so I started to do that, and lo and behold, vulnerabilities or defects went down and stayed down because we went to, if you address the core problem of what compelled the developer engineer to write the code incorrectly in the first place, if you detune that, watch what happens. And oh, by the way, you measure that, and you see that the rework is less. Now you can actually have viable refactoring. There's a lot of work being done if you actually leverage your engineering community. That's the approach we've been taking already, even prior to me coming, but we're accelerating that now. What happens also is, I think to your point of the energy within those communities themselves is tremendous. So I think at the end of the day, if you leverage the engineering and development community you already have, by giving them the training, the tools, the measurements, and that entire loop is continuous development and continuous improvement, the cybersecurity SMEs focus on the hard problems, right? Like cryptography, like communication protocol attacks, things that are more difficult. So it's the 80-20 rule in a sense. 80% of the work can be done because we're looking at things we've had problems with before. We give the tools for the broader community to self-prevent, and then we come back in with the harder problems with the SME team. So a case in point was, at one point I actually reduced my SME team because I didn't need that anymore. I had 125 people, and I'm thinking this is stupid because I didn't need them. I needed very clear pockets of excellence, but the rest was done by the community at large, and I think that does work. I really think it's a great approach.
Thank you.
Can I add in, Gloria? Thank you. So, and I agree. I think those are all great examples of how to find talent, how to grow your talent. One of the things that we've done, and I got to put a plug out there for the research community and the hacking community. We've found that we can hire a lot of great talent. We can grow a lot of great talent. We can teach our development, our software engineers how to do correct coding. A lot of very traditional ways, work with universities, work with the federal government on programs, but that research community we found to be very, very important. So we started a disclosure program here, responsible disclosure, coordinated disclosure, a better name for it, a couple of years ago. We actually matured that program last year to a full-on bug bounty program. We did it in a very interesting way. We didn't just put out there like a small amount of money for any researcher to find some vulnerability in our environment, we actually developed relationships with researchers because we're trying to find this untapped talent, the talent that I can't hire. I hired a couple of great researchers that did the FCA work. They now work in General Motors, but I can't hire all of them. The ones I can't hire, I want to leverage. So what we did is we actually flew a number of researchers to our tech center right up the road here. We stuck them with our red team in our red team lab. We taught them all about our systems, and we sent them home with hardware and said, go off and hack this system, put up very large sums of money for the bugs that they found, and gave them several weeks. No risk to them. They don't have to buy a car. They don't have to buy hardware. They break the hardware. We'll send them new hardware, and really have found that we are getting a lot out of that program, out of that untapped resource, and there's risk associated with it, right? Telling everybody about my ecosystem, asking them to find vulnerabilities. Depending on the fact that I'm giving them a lot of money, they're going to give those vulnerabilities to me and not sell them on the dark web somewhere. But the point being, we have lots of defensive measures in our system, lots of defensive layers. One layer of defense being broken wouldn't be a problem for us from a security posture. So my point being that research community and that hacker community and the ability to look at how you address them maturely and what they're motivated by, what we're motivated by, we found has been very, very helpful for us. So we'll continue that program broadly.
That's sort of a question too, because you're always looking at new research papers and trying to get more research papers. You're running the same thing on the heavy duty side, still trying to get more papers out besides the cybersecurity hackathon during the summer. What else do you guys see in terms of engaging the researchers? I like them because they're independent. Hopefully they're the nice independent ones.
Right.
But what else do you see as a way to encourage that, besides money?
Money always tends to work.
Oh, okay.
No, well,
Give them credit.
Give them credit.
Give them credit
Give them
too.
credit.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, as we go through a recruiting process, is that, look, if you're a cybersecurity practitioner and you're not excited about this industry, something's wrong with you. This is by far probably the most exciting area to be in right now in the, at least in the private sector, and because the challenges are only going to get even more difficult as we become more autonomous and more connected. So this is a good time. So once we start having that conversation, it's a much easier close to the deal. But getting people to consider going to a Cummins or Lear or even GM is, well, I could go to Google. Well, you may not want that, especially if you want a challenge. So I think this is something we need to make sure we foster.
I love it, Kevin. We play on that quite a bit, right? I mean, a Camaro ZL1 is a pretty sexy car, right? And hacking is pretty sexy. And if you put those two together, if I'm on campus or I'm in front of people and I go, I'm going to hire you to come hack a Camaro, they go, man, that's pretty cool,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
So we do have to leverage that, right? That's much cooler, in my opinion, than hacking a mobile phone.
So I believe one way also to involve researchers and people who are really into this simply to have open standards, open specifications. Like what Kevin talked about, the security credential management system that will protect vehicle-to-vehicle communication security. All of this is completely open, Every one of us can look at it, and that actually happened. Lots and lots of people looked at the security. Optane, same thing. People, if you have the opportunity, researchers love looking at these things and finding flaws and, telling the world how they could hack into this, how this flaw is really bad, And I think that's so important to not, keep doing things proprietary, where it's tough for someone to get engaged, but really open it up and have the community support us.
So now I get to put the other Kevin on the spot here, because this is not a prep question. What do you see going forward as cars continue to get more and more complex? And I'm not saying they're necessarily autonomous yet. Mm-hmm. So we could keep getting more complicated ECUs. And how do you keep up with cybersecurity for an older product?
Well, so I think we're doing the right things in terms of as cars get more and more complex, the things that we're talking about here, attracting new talent, training the workforce. One of the things I 100% agree with Kevin on is just raising general hygiene and awareness of cybersecurity. So prior to coming to NHTSA, I worked at the Federal Highway Administration, and state and local DOTs have even more challenges attracting talent to support cyber operations in traffic management centers and with the equipment they're putting at the roadside. How do they do it? They don't have the budget to bring in, the folks who've worked on FCA and worked on other things. How do they do it? Well, the advice and the successful DOTs that have done it are by teaching everybody on their staff how to do better at protecting the systems that they have. The passwords, the 85, 90% things that you can just do, they're not going to hire sort of some of the cutting edge, high-end researchers and folks at the state and local agencies, but they can really train the staff they have to be smarter about the equipment they're deploying, what they tie into their IT systems, how they connect, and just teaching the IT side of the house more of the transportation side as well. So I think if you do that, that's a good foundation to build on for whatever comes next. So you're introducing more complexity. Okay, well let's make sure you keep your workforce up to speed and know what the next things are coming and what they need to know, what the best practices are, the open standards, just things that they can really internalize and make as a part of their everyday job, whatever that particular aspect is. So that's probably the best answer I have at this point. The focus is more on the infrastructure side, but I think it's applicable in the automotive sector is doing a lot of that already.
So now I'm gonna jump new technology, okay? Because go ahead.
One other comment on this. I think one thing we didn't talk about. Yes, we talk about the human capital, right, and that's important. But there's an area within most of our programs where we can automate too, and automation can really help. By that I mean, for example, I used to have a rule for most of my teams that if you are doing something twice a week, it's subject to automation. If you're doing the same manual task twice a week, consider. So I built DevOps teams so that we would prioritize which of these things would be done, which tools could be built, and lo and behold, people had time back in their pockets, right? So I think there's something we need to also consider is where can we, as a practitioner, use technology to our advantage as well.
Okay, now I'm going to do tilt on us. So I had the Department of Energy write a chapter called When Your Truck Turns Off Your TV and Steals Your Money. And it's really about electric vehicles connecting into the grid. Larry, I'm going to let you play with this one. Cummins has announced their electric vehicle. What happens and what do we do, again, for even clean vehicle hygiene as it goes up to the grid? I'm going to bounce to you, Kevin, after that and say, okay, what are your concerns? I think we all know the grid's very vulnerable.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that in a sense, as a company, we've played with for a while because we also make power generation units, not just standby, but also prime power. And so understanding what that connectivity is, it's back to a discussion we had at the very beginning. It's a risk management conversation. Where's the risk? Where are the interfaces? Where's the attack tree that you're using to lever or to determine where your risk is? So I think that's the prime thing you've got to do. The thing that actually concerns me more at this point, rather than a kind of a cyber attack crossing that, is just the simple load. As I look at what it takes to power a Class 7, Class 8, or one of the city buses that we're delivering, there's a lot of juice it takes to make that run. And so if I think about our school bus fleets that we support today, they all come in, at 9 in the morning to recharge or refuel. They all come in at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a lot of load hitting that grid. And I think that could look like a denial of service attack when in fact it's just 60 buses that all decided to hook up at the same time. And so how do you manage the distribution of that electricity, I think is as big a question as the cyber question.
So I guess what I will say is from the NHTSA perspective, we're very concerned and we obviously monitor cybersecurity as it affects safety critical systems on board the vehicle, right? And so that's the lens with which we look through cybersecurity at NHTSA. If there are cybersecurity vulnerabilities that impact safety of life for the motoring public, that's really within our regulatory authority and our statutes. Now, if electrification introduces additional threats into the vehicle, infrastructure charging stations, then if they travel and go down a safety critical path, then we care very much about that. Our partners, though, we work very closely with are the DOE, Department of Energy. They certainly are doing quite a bit at looking at the risk from the electrification infrastructure, and so we basically partner very closely with them, had a number of internal discussions and continue working with them on where it crosses from sort of more of a DOE type responsibility to a little bit more of a DOT and safety, and so we try to respect the lines of our federal partners there, but stay sort of on top of everything that's going on as best we can across the different agencies.
Does anybody else want to add on to that discussion?
Yeah, maybe a bit. So we work on these onboard chargers for vehicles, and it's one of the most fascinating area I've worked on. You know, you think, well, there's this charger, and you plug in your car, and it charges the battery of the car. So in terms of security, first you want to make sure that you cannot, like maliciously overcharge the battery. But then there's a lot of communication happening. You know, the idea is eventually that you plug in, and by doing so, all the financial transaction happens. You know, think about it like the gas station where today you need to use a credit card. That's all automated. So we have the financial component, and we talked about, what's a reasonable scenario for someone hacking into that system. Well, if you can charge your vehicle for free, that provides quite some motivation. And then the next thing is, well, what is if you can hack into the charger and you request more power than your power lines actually can provide? You hopefully have the right circuit breakers in the background, right? But turns out very often that's unfortunately not given. So we really, protect our chargers in a way that someone cannot change these settings and pull more power than they have. And now you come to the heavy trucks. So we talk about megawatt charging, I believe. And you have 50 school buses or so in a fairly small area, and they put 50 megawatts of, they pull 50 megawatts. That will damage your power grid for quite a while. So this is when we talk about infrastructure. So it's a fascinating area that I think most people don't understand how broad it is in terms of security.
So obviously in the audience, we must be answering your questions because we don't have many up here. Do you guys know how to use this app? If not, Mark LeDuc is here if you need some help doing that. But believe it or not, we've answered most of the audience's questions so far. So Jeff, what do you see as the most fascinating thing that is going right now in cybersecurity for cars? And then my second question is, how do you explain this stuff to the mechanical engineers?
How do you explain it to mechanical engineers? So the most fascinating thing, it's a really good question. I guess I have to go, not cybersecurity specific, but the level of autonomy and automated driving that's happening in our industry, and that disruption, and we're at the center of it with our acquisition of Cruise Automation, and the importance of kind of building on a connected ecosystem, cybersecurity posture, but then understanding what new risks are introduced with the suite of sensors, unique sensors that are coming into autonomous vehicles, and that need for redundancy in your communications, and you're working through third parties that you don't control. And there is, you probably talk about autonomous vehicle security as its own panel. So I think there's a lot there, right? Autonomous vehicles and the security of them. It's not going to be foundational. I wouldn't say that automotive security was foundational. I think it built on all the principles of IT security that have been developed for a long time and really adapted to the kind of product ecosystem. But it's going to be another step function into what we need to do. Explaining this to mechanical engineers, I would say, is the same as explaining it to your board of directors. You've got to talk about it in a sense of risk. What's the risk? What are the controls you're trying to put in place to mitigate that risk? If you talk in those, if it's mechanical engineer, we're all engineers. We all understand these principles. So if you talk in those types of discussions, I think everybody understands it. Can't get too down in the weeds, right?
Kevin?
No, I concur. I think however, I would say one of the things that I see as an emerging technology that's exciting for me is as we move from the traditional embedded control units historically to more powerful, either GPUs or either general purpose computers, is microservices, and how do you protect that from a security perspective? And that also tends to lead to the next step is, how can we make the vehicles aware of security on its own? One of my biggest concerns would be having a vehicle that's untethered with deprecated technology. How does it protect itself, right? So that's one area that we are definitely looking into with vigor. Basically, how can we use machine learning on the vehicle itself for cyber? Again, not to be unique to auto, it's being done already in other industries. How can we leverage some of that? Again, in my last role, we had a lot of good success there, a lot of good success. And I think that's an area I think is exciting. That's one also, again, back to the talent issue, that it attracts people because they understand that. They're doing that already in other technologies. But now to say, okay, well, you aren't doing this for a data center, but you're doing this with 4 or 8 or 18 wheels, right? So I think that's an area that's exciting to me, because this is, again, being new to the auto industry, something that we're producing today is still 11, 17 years out. I don't know about you, but I can't look back 11, 17 years and say, well, I have to use that technology today. So these are things we need to be really, really, from a cyber perspective, aware of, so that ultimately the vehicles can become self-aware and self-protecting.
Andre?
I think I'll change the question a bit. So, what do I think is the most exciting opportunity for security? And Kevin mentioned it earlier, we really need to focus on automation or automated tools, let's say it that way, automated tools. So today, if we are becoming aware of potential vulnerabilities, it's a lot of manual work to understand what is the actual impact, are we concerned or not, what do we need to do, how do we need to do it, is that piece of software actually in our component. And so we work on technology to really automate that, where we have all of these things listed. I hope at some day in the future we get these vulnerabilities reports in a standardized electronic format, and where we really don't need to do anything, where I just show up in the morning in my office and it says this component is potentially affected, and all of these are not, but only this one you need to now manually have a person look at it and take action. I think there's a huge opportunity of streamlining that, of making our life easier, and of not missing events, right? Manual work, unfortunately, means sometimes we miss things.
So Larry, what's exciting that you see?
So the thing that I think gets
you guys do engines, now you do trucks.
Well, we do engines, we do power generation systems, we do drivetrains. I mean, we've been known to do one or two things. But what I think about is, when I look at this space, even looking up a little bit, how does this change the operation model of the vehicles? Does this change the ownership model? Do all of a sudden we go to transportation for service, moving freight as a service, moving people as a service? What does that do to us as a supplier from a reliability perspective, not just with regard to cyber, but with regard to the entire system that we're providing? And then from a regulatory perspective, how does that change the responsibilities that a regulator may put upon us to say, hey, we want you to do these things? How does it change the relationships that we have with our supply chain downstream and upstream? So I think it's an incredibly exciting time. I don't know what to anticipate. And my daughter, I think, got her major planning streak from me. And so not knowing what to anticipate is a little anxious, but that also makes it fun.
So this is an audience question, see if you guys are awake. How many of you are willing to pay extra for cybersecurity on your vehicles? Okay.
So the ones that didn't raise their hands, those are the ones we're going to target, right?
Those are targeted ones.
No, we like the ones who raise their hands.
And so the other question that actually came out of the audience is, how can a driver of their own vehicle verify whether their over-the-update was correct or not? And you get to define the word correct.
So I'll start with that one,
okay,
because we're providing this service today. And so when we're providing this service today, we're doing it through generally through a third-party telematics device and through a third-party, for us, a third-party OEM. And so there's actually a human-machine interface inside the vehicle because it's a commercial vehicle. There's that telematics screen that the driver has to hit the button to say, yes, I'm in a good position to do that. And then B, at the end of that process says, everything is checked out. And so they're going to know if that vehicle operates differently after that, they're going to be very aware. And so the other thing it'll tell them is if the update failed for whatever reason, and there's a whole series of reasons that update could have failed, it will let them know your vehicle wasn't updated successfully.
Anybody else want to grab that? Audience, how many of you guys actually update your phones?
Everyone
Just
now.
about everybody, okay. How many of you are willing to update your cars, your trucks, your commercial vehicles? Okay, it's a little bit of idea there. So, Kevin, now we'll let Kevin, because Kevin's sitting there perplexed. What else should I talk about? So Kevin, as you're here on this panel here, what do you want to leave the audience as a last thought? Not a last thought, a recurring thought even?
You know, I guess one of the things I hadn't mentioned previously is I do think activities, we did an activity, a joint activity with industry and our partners in DHS about a year ago called Cyberstorm, where we actually rehearsed scenarios, one of which was a ransomware scenario, and we worked with the industry on that tabletop type exercise, and we found that to be extremely helpful. That was a very good experience, and I think that's in the right direction of getting cybersecurity into sort of the muscle memory of folks who are as a part of it. And so just going through that process, working with our partners in industry, figuring out who to call, who to talk to, just working through some of those and conducting those exercises, at least from the federal government side, us at NHTSA, we found activities like that. It was the first time we'd been a part of it. We learned a lot from it, and we thought it was a really great activity, and we can see doing more of those things in the future. I think the Auto ISAC may have been thinking about something, and DHS has this annual activity around cyberstorm awareness, and so that's a really good thing that I think we can continue more of in the future, and folks should be aware that we're being proactive as we can in trying to understand what the threats are and prepare for them in a systematic way.
And Kevin?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think I advise every company to go through their own internal tabletop exercises at least a couple times a year, primarily for the point that Kevin just made of the people who are on the call. So what's going to happen is that when that event happens, those people that you went through the tabletop exercise with won't be on the call. Guaranteed, right? There's people go on vacation, people move roles. But understanding how to fill those empty, now empty seats or seats with new people, and how are you going to communicate, what you're going to communicate, how do you actually go through the triage. These are important because what happens is when you ultimately have an event and everyone pulls out that big white binder, no one's going to tab through it and try and figure it out. It doesn't work. You have to go through the exercise. It has to become muscle memory. And I'll tell you, when my consulting days, people just did not do that. And as a former white hat hacker, I tell you, we're looking for the low-hanging fruit to get to the good stuff, right? And what happens is you don't realize that if it's that the event that's occurring, is it a malfunction? Is it an error? Is it, my code stack just fell on itself, or is it an attack? It doesn't matter. You need to make sure you can triage this as fast as possible. So I encourage everyone, if you don't do it, absolutely take the time and effort to go through tabletop exercises.
And Andre? We're going to finish with Jeff is going to be last, so just to let you know. So.
I fully agree. I guess one area where I think we should collaborate more, you heard a bit about the Auto ISAC, I believe, and how we share information around vulnerabilities, how, if one of us learns about a vulnerability in one of our suppliers, then we share this information, and this works out very well. I think we should also focus on collaborating around prevention, that we don't have vulnerabilities in the first place, but that we really start collaborating and understanding which technologies, for instance, and I don't mean companies or anything, but really, on what strategy should we focus first? What provides us the sort of the biggest bang for the buck around security? And so the Auto ISAC just established a R&D working group to really understand, okay, what are the really interesting topics that come up in, say, 3 years, and how well do they work? And so, yeah, I'm actually really glad to see that, you know, we all now come together, not only sort of thinking about the plan B once there is a problem, but being really proactive and trying to avoid that we get there in the first place.
Larry, something quick.
So I've heard two themes, and I would agree with them both. Collaborate, 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 and we have to learn to trust. Without the trust, we won't collaborate, and we have to look at this as one big system. That's my close.
And Jeff?
All right, just a quick question. How many in the audience would buy a car based on the security posture, not pay more for it, buy a car based on security posture? So that's interesting, and so we did some market research on this, and this is a very informed group, and I guess that's the theme of my last comment. General public isn't totally informed yet. They are when it comes to AV, autonomous vehicles. They aren't generally informed when it comes to a connected vehicle. You guys are obviously much more informed and you're interested in cybersecurity. My last theme would be to please, if you're having challenges in your company, elevating cybersecurity to the right level, and you have relationships with anybody up here or anybody in the Auto ISAC, I mean, you can cold call or cold email me. I'd love to help, because I'm sure that, I'm assuming that General Motors works with everybody who's probably in this audience, because our ecosystem is so big. It's really important to have it at the highest levels in your company, so you get all the help you need to do all the things that we're talking about up here. So that would be my ask.
And so my last closing is, this is a nonfiction novel. It's not scary. You can actually read a little novelette, you know, before you go to bed at night. And it is available up on the SAE website. I'm going to say thank you to our panel. It was a good discussion. Thank you for the audience for your questions.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next year. Thank you.
Thank you.